Assalamu alaikum and peace be with you. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Muslim Network TV is growing real fast. It is on Galaxy 19 satellite. It is also on muslimnetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, as well as a whole lot of YouTube and the social media. Welcome. We're in America, and the United States of America. This land used to be somebody else's land. I remember somebody asking me, I was just coming from the train, was tired of the travel, and on escalator, just one person was blocking my way. Everyone else was standing on the right side. So I requested, would you mind moving? She did not like that. And as I was exiting the whole train station, she shouted, go back where you came from. I went back to her. I told her, you came first, you leave first. And she was a white lady. And I have never forgotten that. Have you ever found a Native American who is telling anyone to go back where you came from? Have you have any interaction with Native people? Right now, a whole lot of questions are opening up in our country about ourselves, about our identity. People who are here, who were eliminated through genocide and illegal occupations. And now we don't know who those people are, where they are, what state they are in. And then there were people who were brought in without their choice. They were forced to come here, and they were slaves from Africa. Slavery ended, but mentality of slave owners somehow survives. And that's treatment of former slaves also survives through our legal and social system, through our education system, through our criminal justice system. And now, in the recent state, in the current phase of the Black liberation movement, people are going after monuments of those who defended slavery, monument of people who fought to keep the slavery in its place, and the slave owners' monuments. While civilization technology is moving forward, is civility, is humanity, is improving on the same pace, or it's far slower? These are the questions in my mind, and I have someone I like to bring up as our guest, whose mother was most likely a Native American, but she was not raised as a Native American. It was not a point of honor. And as a scholar, she indulged in the studies of Native people. And she became an activist, not just an activist, but activist scholar. I would like to welcome at Muslim Network TV, Roxanne Dunburn Ortiz. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you.
Roxanne Ortiz is a historian, an activist, a writer, a professor emeritus at the California State University. She grew up in a rural Oklahoma where Native people were around, except they were isolated. They will not go to the same school as other people. She was a daughter of a tenant farmer and a part Indian mother. She has been active in international indigenous movement for more than 4 decades. and is known for her lifelong commitment to national and international social justice issues. She has written 15 books, including Roots of Resistance, A History of Land Tenure in New Mexico. Her latest work is titled A Nation of Immigrant, Settler Colonialism, White Supremacy, and the History of Exclusion and Erasure, which will be published in 2021. Welcome, Roxanne, to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Tell us why people are focusing their anger on statues. Those are statues of dead people, long gone.
Yes, as a historian, it really is warms my heart because I think that so much is being learned. These are mostly young people all over the country and, well, the world, it turns out, that are actually looking things up. Maybe they've never even noticed these statues before. I think Native people have been maybe in the vanguard of this for decades by challenging the Columbus cult. Um, there are thousands, no one even knows how many statues and other kinds of memorials for Columbus, who represents the doctrine of discovery and the beginning of European colonialism worldwide and the beginning of chattel slavery, the transatlantic slave trade. So he's no one to be admired, and yet he's everywhere. And place names, streets, universities, cities, towns in almost every state. So this has been a native practice for quite a long time, is to get rid of Columbus statues. So it's very heartening to see up until last month.
You're saying, Roxanne, that the first people who started removing Columbus statues were actually Native Americans.
Oh yeah, and not just recently. This has been decades. Well, not always succeeding in getting them removed, but certainly, and also opposing Columbus Day, which is a federal holiday every October, actually celebrating Columbus. And so this, especially after 1992, the 400-year anniversary of Columbus voyage, this has been a major issue. So this, yeah, so it's really good to see this up until this period, this summer, this spring. The only thing that was being challenged were the Confederate statues and the naming of army bases, and these are mostly in the South. So it was somewhat limited, but I think it was likely. I'm not sure, and I don't think probably most of the people who are doing this right now want to be named, but I'm pretty sure that the toppling of the Columbus statues that began was certainly a Native idea. Native activists are very active in every movement. There's a very strong alliance between Native organizations and Black Lives Matter and other people of color organizations. And it's pretty amazing because in many ways, women have become the main leaders to Native women, Black women. So it's so different from my generation, the 60s and 70s, of mostly white male leadership and white-led movements. And although the rainbow coalitions were attempted and were very wonderful while they lasted, they never deepened like it's obvious they have now. And I was not really aware myself how deep they have become until I've witnessed in the last few months in the
So let's talk a little bit more about the change of guards and the leadership, but statues. So initially, the Columbus statues were targeted, and you mentioned there is a Columbus cult. So what is that Columbus cult which you are referring to? Because it is in a way connected to the founding myth of the United States, right?
yes, and Columbus never even touched upon anything having to do with what became the United States, except the what is a colony of the United States, Puerto Rico. But he never touched, or in any of his voyage, touched on what is now the continent of um, of, of the United States. So it's definitely a celebration of colonialism, and maybe people don't realize it, but it became a celebration of immigration back in 1892. In the 1890s, there was a huge immigration from southern Italy to cities, including San Francisco, a very large Italian population, and the northeastern cities, and Chicago. These are, really some of them very political activists, famous anarchists like the Sacco and Vanzetti, who were executed for their political activities. But the Catholic Church, which was very strong among the immigrants and gave aid and all, was very conservative. And so they formed the Knights of Columbus with this purpose of promoting the idea that Italians were actually indigenous people of North America because one of their own, Columbus, discovered it.
Oh my goodness, who never came here?
Yes. So that's what
They would be better off and richer Catholic Church if they have promoted the Italian food instead of Columbus.
yeah, exactly. Yes, the food is great. So here in San Francisco, we have, it's a very, we have one of the largest streets is Columbus Avenue. And the Columbus statue was toppled last week. That's on top of Coit Tower, one of our landmarks, an old lighthouse.
So you think the Knight of Columbus was founded for essentially to promote this idea?
Yes, they're the ones that put up all the statues around the country back in the 1890s and early 20th century.
So
That's what,
there need to be some pressure on the Catholic hierarchy to those who they themselves, because right now Catholic depend on Latino immigrants who have nothing to do with Columbus, and the Latino activists are more aligned with Native Americans as compared to the Columbus. So I think the Catholic Church has a good opportunity to admit their sins a little faster than they admitted the sins of collaboration with Nazis.
well, they've never, and we have in the international movement, we've been at the United Nations, we've been in constant touch with the Vatican lawyers who represent the Vatican at the UN. And we have many times met with them, and delegations of Native Americans have gone to Rome and actually met with the Pope to denounce the doctrine of discovery, because this was a papal bull. There were two of them, important ones. In 1454, the papal bull that gave the Portuguese the right to take West Africa and all the people there into slavery. So that was actually beginning of the transatlantic slave trade up to Lisbon. And then with Columbus' voyage in 1492, a papal bull in 1493 gave the Western Hemisphere to Spain. And Columbus actually sailed for Spain. He didn't sail for Italy. Italy wasn't involved at all. He was from Genoa. Italy didn't exist.
Yeah. So King
So,
and Queen of the Spain were the one who were his patrons.
right. And so it gets mixed up because here the Knights of Columbus are not only promoting well, at least here in California, Columbus, but Queen Isabella and Ferdinand. And in our state capital, Sacramento, in front of our state capitol is a statue of Columbus, which I hope goes, and one of Queen Isabella, because the Spanish colonized, of course, taking half of Mexico. The missions of California came into the United States, and so that is, it's a very strong element here. But that's why the stories that can go with the toppling of these statues, which is a really righteous act, but also I find even if the people doing it don't know the whole story, I think people start looking it up and they start having conversations about it, and then they learn something that.
And learning from you is real beneficial for me. I didn't know the role of Catholic Church with the Night of Columbus and installing all the Columbus statues. We will take a short break, and when we come back, I'm interested in learning what other networks are installing other statues as well. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. You're watching Muslim Network TV. And we are always on Muslim on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as muslimnetwork.tv, Roku, and Amazon Fire.tv. And my guest is Roxana Dunbar Ortiz, and we will be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe, and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah, let's explore.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with my guest, Roxana Dunbar Ortiz. And we're talking about the statues that the Catholic Church established, the Knight of Columbus, who have been going around installing the Columbus statues, who never came to America, giving credit to discovering the United States. And those statues are being toppled by younger people. And Roxana Dunbar Ortiz is a professor emeritus, a writer of 15 books, and part with Native Heritage herself. Share with us who else has been involved in installing these statues which people are demolishing right now.
Well, the most the ones that have been in the forefront, of course, with the Black Lives Matter, with the movement for Black Lives Matter and the issues in the last few months that are and the history that's becoming better known to people and bringing out huge crowds of solidarity are the Confederate statues, which proliferate all over the South. They are they're everywhere. I don't see how it's even possible to identify them all because there are plaques, there are statues, there are.
Who installed them?
But it has it certainly has begun, and I think for the first time there's a critical mass of Southerners, white Southerners, who are repulsed, by being identified, especially the younger generation. But also army bases. There are 9 military bases. Most of them are in the South. But there's a very interesting one here in California. It's no longer a base. It's Fort Bragg. And there's another Fort Bragg, which is in North Carolina, the main Marine training base on counterinsurgency. And it's named for the same man as our Fort Bragg in California, which is interesting because California wasn't in the Confederacy. And he was a Confederate general from North Carolina, owned over 100 slaves, and apparently was a very brutal slave owner. Not that there were any good ones. But he, so it's kind of curious, what this Fort Bragg. It's now a town, but it was a fort, a U.S. Army fort. And in 1857, it was built. This is 3 years before the Civil War, before Braxton Bragg, General Braxton Bragg, was a Confederate general. He was still a United States Army general. He wasn't out here. He had fought. He was an officer in the war against Mexico, the 2-year war, vicious war. He was at the Battle of Monterey, which was a major battle the United States won against mostly civilians with very few arms. And a lieutenant that was under him was assigned to the Presidio in California. California had only been a part of the United States for 9 years at that time. And they were actually creating a genocide against the native Californians who were resisting the gold miners' violence. It was also violence against the Mexican citizens, former Mexican citizens. So there's a book by Benjamin Madley on American genocide, on that genocide in California. But this was a part of it. This base was set up by this lieutenant, now a captain, the Presidio. And he so admired his commander in the Mexican War that he named that base, that's 150 miles north of San Francisco, for Braxton Bragg. And this was a base, this was a fort that was a concentration camp for all the survivors of the genocide. They put them in, it wasn't just one native nation, it was a mixture, it was refugees. Many of them starved to death. So this is.
So would you say that these younger people who are going after the symbols of repressions are better educated than a generation before, so they are standing up and connecting the dots here?
Well, I think they're better educated politically, more politically engaged than any generation since mine, since the 60s. Not that there haven't been wonderfully political people, but in the last 6 years since my Indigenous Peoples History of the United States was published and became very popular among young people of color especially, but but in general, young students. I've, lectured all over the country, and I have just sensed this really massive amount of knowledge that it has been consumed. I think, yes, it's partly that they're students, but who their professors are. There's a generation of scholars, Native scholars, African American scholars, Mexican scholars, Puerto Rican scholars, who have been telling the truth about the United States in their classrooms, and books being published that tell the truth. And
Would you say that the current textbooks in high school and college level are relatively better than the textbooks, say, 30, 40 years ago when it comes to Native people and the symbols of repressions?
no, I don't think the official textbooks that are largely, because it's a big industry, decided by Texas, which is the largest public school market. And basically, they decide, and then every other district in the country has to adopt those textbooks.
Now, it is, this is easy for people to digest the Columbus, what he got to do and what he represents and things like that, to go after his statues and the statues of those who were oppressors of the people and slave owners. But so majority of in America will be educated through the process and they will learn. But when they go after the symbol like George Washington, who was a slave owner, but when they go after his statues, who so directly connected, don't you think this this will be defined as something which will leave majority of the Americans behind?
Well, it was interesting that in Portland last week, George Washington's statue was taken down. He was not just a very large slave owner, over 200 slaves, and no one could beat Jefferson with his 600, but he was an Indian killer. He was the original template for the next century of Indian killing. He started very young as the head of the Virginia militia. He was a vicious military man. He was not this gentle giant that is. He was only 25, when the independence movement started. So he's always painted this, this white white wigged gentle giant. He was, I know the Seneca Indians call him Town Destroyer, because in the War of Independence they destroyed all of the Seneca towns in upstate New York. What's up now, upstate New York. So George Washington's biography needs to be known by everyone, and then people can choose what they think of him. But he was mainly responsible for the push over the Appalachian Mountains. That becomes a romantic story of Daniel Boone and these pioneers, going and being hostile Indians, surrounding them and fighting them off. But he went in and mapped that territory before it was legally. It was illegal for him to do it by British law, under the British. And he mapped and sold. He was a real estate giant. He's like Trump. He really was a real estate giant. He sold plots of land that had no legal basis. And that's why they had to become independent. Every one of those founders were marketing in either the slave trade and or Indian land, real estate illegally taken. Because in 1863, the British barred any movement of the colonists in the 13 colonies, to go over the Appalachian Allegheny Mountains. And they had already sold the land. So they had to make a revolution in order not to be absolutely stripped of their great wealth, which they
Okay.
often
So you're saying that there are now, if you go after like that, there will be hardly any angel left, nations have these myths and people, and so my concern here is not what is the truth or not. My concern is that while there is a wide level of acceptance to go after the Columbus and the symbols of these operation, will there be anyone left? Because Abraham Lincoln, there is a discussion and things that, okay, well, he didn't leave in his will that slave will be liberated who are under his positions. So there'll be no one left. Is this a process of dismantling of what America is?
Well, I'm a historian. I just want people to know the truth, and then they can make a choice of what they want to honor and not honor, or if they want to make a new country that tells the truth and has
So,
different.
so you being a historian, a part of your personal history, you gradually develop a scholarship on that, and that is that your mother was native, but it was never disclosed to you by her, or you were unable to relate as you were growing up. So would you mind sharing a little bit of that personal thing, which took you to develop empathy and scholarship and published and became an activist for the Native people?
Yes, part of that, but my father was also from a Scots-Irish background, and these were the major settlers, colonial settlers that were the Indian killers. So, it's cowboy and Indian parentage. But I was much more influenced by my father's family, which was my grandfather was a socialist in Oklahoma. He was in the Socialist Party, and my father carried the names of the founders of the industrial workers of the world. So I grew up more with a class, a sense of being working class, and as my identity, and that's still my major identity is working class and class politics. But I was very it wasn't really an emotional or an identification thing that brought me to the Native movement. It was the truth of the history that they were telling, because I learned it from them. I learned it not in university. I learned it from the people I met after Wounded Knee, when I was working on the Wounded Knee legal cases with Vine Deloria and others. Vine Deloria became a mentor. He was, of course, a lawyer, a theologian, very highly educated Lakota person. But most of the people I was meeting and learning from didn't even have a high school education. Some were illiterate, but they knew the history of the United States. So that was what brought me to the Native movement, and why I think it's the most important to center Native American experience as as through the eyes of Native Americans, how the United States is seen, and for that to be known by everyone, because it's very liberating. I don't think people are liberated by living with lies and untruth. And the U.S. is a very, if you take a psychological term,
So
they
truth will set you free, as someone has said. I don't know who was
yeah.
the person who said, but you're watching Muslim Network TV,
Mhm.
and this is Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, and we'll be right back after these messages.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. Past campaigns covered a wide range of humanitarian concerns. Through Bosnia Task Force, imams and leaders of Chicago's Muslim community worked to ensure Bosnia became a top national issue. This led to life-saving American policies in Bosnia. A key accomplishment was helping to get rape declared a war crime. Initiatives also included Kosovo Task Force, Central African Republic Task Force, and Flint Coalition, which brought awareness to the water crisis affecting the people of Flint, Michigan. Highlights of our work include supporting Black Lives Matter, Parliament of the World's Religions, addressing climate change.
So wasteful consumption starts the ruthless production, and that's where we need all the fossil fuel in the world.
And prominent media exposure.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid, President of Justice for All.
And I'm the Director of Outreach for Justice for All.
And that's why we need to go back to what worked.
Today we're demanding an apology from the CEO of Costco.
The Chinese crackdown on Uyghurs and other Turkic people has only gotten worse.
Current programs such as Burma Task Force advocate for the rights of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, internally displaced populations, and all those denied freedom of movement and at risk of starvation. Through this, we mobilized thousands of calls to elected representatives. This paved the way for the U.S. to increase funding for Rohingya refugees from $30 million to over $600 million. 2 of our documentaries were featured on international news outlets. The Rohingya People, A Slow-Burning Genocide on BBC World News, and Rohingya Refugees Tell of Massacre was featured on CNN. We've organized rallies, UN mission visits, expanded presentations on campuses, promoted research and report writing, outreach to think tanks, media, and other influencers. Faith Coalition educates about the Rohingya genocide and crimes against humanity faced by ethnic groups in Burma. We've traveled to refugee camps, convened a meeting of Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya leaders, both to encourage cooperation and to guide them in congressional outreach. We organized Rohingya Advocacy Day. This led to over 100 participants visiting the offices of 60 U.S. senators and congressional representatives. Free Kashmir advocates for the people of Kashmir. Long-term goals include the call for self-determination, the end of the Indian military's occupation of the territory, and raising awareness of Kashmiri issues among the American people. After the August 5th reinvasion of Kashmir, we organized national protests in front of various Indian government buildings, partnered with Stand with Kashmir, and launched a petition condemning the Gates Foundation's decision to present Prime Minister Modi a humanitarian award. Save Uyghur informs Muslims and neighbors of other faiths about the ongoing cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims and mobilizes public support. Our projects include boycotting Chinese products with our Fast from China campaign, pushing Bill S-178 in the Senate, and organizing a nationwide protest of Costco. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and my guest is Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And we are talking about the founding myth and challenging those founding myths. And one of the things which I wonder, Roxanne, is that what was the situation in which you were not made aware of your heritage with Native people?
Well, the situation, I was born in 1938. This was a Depression era. And Native people resisted from the very beginning, 1607. But once the United States was formed, Native nations had no way of making alliances with other European powers to play one against the other and to maintain their power. And the United States was actually set up, its very constitution and founding, as a fiscal military state to take the continent. They had maps already drawn before the Constitution, the Northwest Ordinance, with lines drawn from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So it was the intention at the very founding to take the continent. Now, built into that intention is genocide, because how are they going to do that unless they get rid of the people already living there? So they make up the myth that there's sparsely populated people wandering around in the forest, but these were major nations of people, mostly agricultural people. Of course, east of the Mississippi, it's one of the 7 agricultural centers of the world that were established 12,000 years ago, along with the Tigris, Euphrates, the Nile, the Pole River in China, the Inca, Andes, and central Mexico. This is the rich land that they took for plantation agriculture to raise non-food crops with slave labor in the United States. And so this intention to go across the continent, they developed a complex militarization. There's the army, but there are also the militias, the state militias, and then the citizens' militias that could form, like the slave patrols and the militias that killed Indians. These were voluntary citizens' militias. They are mandated in the Second Amendment of the Constitution, the right to bear arms. So this is the
environment in which
this is by 1890, all Native people were in concentration camps in North America, Canada too, and so this was then the big boom. Go overseas and conquer the Philippines, conquer Guam, conquer Puerto Rico, Cuba, and then move on to the rest of the world. So Indians are forgotten. They're at their lowest population level. They're on reservations with food not self-sufficient in any way.
So in that environment, it was not, it was a political choice, or it was a thoughtful consideration for your Native mother not to even mention that she is Native American?
Well, that she was the man that her mother married was an Irish man. So once you marry, he did not go to the. They were already her mother was already separated from any Native people that her ancestors were ever with.
So what was the first time you came to know that you have that heritage?
I don't know. It simply was never stated, and I have no documentation or records of being Native. So I still don't know. Like I say, for me, it's not an identity issue to work in the Native movement. It's never been exclusively natives.
So, what is the state of the native people at this moment in the United States?
Well,
let me ask you a little easier or maybe difficult question. If you compare it 40 years ago, do you think today Native Americans are better off as compared to 40 years ago?
I think the Red Power movement in the 50s and 60s and 70s made some substantial changes, forced the government to, there was Alcatraz, but there were many, many occupations of land. They won, for instance, the Taos Pueblo people won their sacred Blue Lake back. That's a precedent for taking land back. They won court cases to the Supreme Court in the Northwest in Washington State for Native people having the first rights, prior rights to the fisheries because they're the salmon people. The Bolt decision, they won. They won the right, the Lakota people, to the Black Hills that it was illegally taken. They were offered $90 million in compensation, which was peanuts for what it's worth, because there's also gold in those mountains. It was taken by Custer. And that they don't take the money. It's in a trust fund. It's now $1.5 billion. These are still at those reservations in South Dakota. These are the poorest people in the Western Hemisphere. The lifespan of male is 47 years old.
Now, this is the current statistics.
The current
and it is the same as the lifespan of people in Afghanistan who are being bombed for 40 years.
That's right.
Excuse me.
But think of that. They will not take that $1.5 billion because they want the land back. Now, this level of integrity, if other people in this country could reach that level of what is a value, I think it would be a revolution. That's why they have so much to learn.
So you think as compared to 30, 40 years ago, their struggle has resulted in some gains?
It has, and there's now
But it does not impact the life because life expectancy is 47, which is
half the population lives off reservations. That's because they're not sustainable, they're too small. So the point is that land needs to be, people talk, reparations for slavery, I think should be money reparations, and whatever put into trust, whatever African Americans choose, they have to be able to collect on all of that value lost by so many means, but especially under slavery. For Native people, as I demonstrated in taking the money, they will not take the money. They want the land back. So there's much land in the country that is under federal and state jurisdiction, especially west of the Mississippi, but also east of the Mississippi, that mostly is sacred land for Native people that was taken away, that needs to be restored, and that includes all the national
parks. So would you say that restoration of land is the #1 demand by Native people by and large in America?
Yes, sovereignty and land, right.
So are the legal course which has been successful in some areas, is that thoroughly being pursued? Yes,
and there really are some very brilliant Native lawyers. There were, they've developed, and, when I got a PhD in history in 1974, there were 3 Native Americans with PhDs in the country. There were more lawyers. There were maybe a dozen lawyers, 4 or 5 medical doctors. So now, because of the Red Power movement and the opening of I helped establish Native American studies in a couple of universities, and with Native American studies, we have this new generation of people with tools, education in archaeology and medicine and in astrophysics, science, but also in the history and in literature. So there's a renaissance. It is no tribute to the federal government of the United States. This has all been won by movements, and also our international work that started in 1974. The American Indian Movement.
So you estimated when you were doing the PhD, there were just handful of professional mainstream educated.
Right.
Do you have any idea if there were 10 lawyers at that time? Do you think there are 100 lawyers at this moment?
Oh, Native lawyers, I would say there are probably 400 or 500 Native lawyers.
Okay. And the PhD at that time were about 4, and now?
Now, I don't know how many PhDs there are, but I personally know at least 100. I'm sure there are probably many more in the pipeline, lots and lots of graduate students. And in the Ivy Leagues, there's Professor Philip Deloria is Vine Deloria's son, Lakota, who's a professor of history at Harvard. So there are, there.
So is there a possibility that just like the Black Lives Matter movement has gone mainstream after years of a struggle, is there a possibility that Red Power movement will become as known because of these intellectuals, or are people who are getting educated are moving away from the movement and organizing?
Definitely. The Red Nation, which was founded about 8 years ago now, I think, in Albuquerque, mainly around the homeless in the cities and towns in Arizona and New Mexico. The homeless are mostly Dene Navajo men, and some Pueblos and Apaches, but mainly Navajo, and they're mistreated like other homeless people are. Their camps burned, and teenagers hassling them, and the racism that's endemic in that is even more vicious. So they basically formed to just assist, to have guards, put out guards at night around these encampments in Gallup and Albuquerque and other places. And it has formed into a very powerful national movement and has an alliance, a very strong alliance with Black Lives Matter. And it has been, of course, you may have heard about last week the man shooting into a crowd of demonstrators who were trying to take down the statue of the founder, the Spanish colonial founder of New Mexico, the conquistador, Don Juan de Oñate. And they did get it taken down. There were 2 of them in New Mexico. They both got taken down. But this descendant of the Spanish settlers, a Hispano man, shot, tried to kill people in the crowd. So this is, they were supporting the movement for Black Lives in this, in the police. And of course, Native people get harassed by the police. Actually, Native people have a higher incarceration rate than any other ethnic group, and more police killings, but the absolute numbers are much smaller, and it's more concentrated in South and North Dakota, Minnesota, New Mexico, Arizona, Northern California, the Northwest, than all over the country, like for African Americans.
There is so much to learn from you. You carry with you a lot of knowledge and a lot of history. But before we let you go, we got just about a couple of minutes. How did you become an activist?
Well, I grew up in rural Oklahoma and went to a 5-room school, not a 2-room school, but a very small school, 100 students from grade 1 to 12. And I left for the city so I could work my last year of high school and went to a trade school, a public trade school. It was the first year of integration, um, of Black integration after the Supreme Court desegregated public schools. And it was the working class, white working class school I was in, and almost everyone worked and went to school. And so that's where they chose to have the first integrated school, probably the worst high school in Oklahoma. And they brought over a dozen or so students from the all Black college. Dunbar has my name, Dunbar High School. And several of them were excellent athletes. But there were 3 or 4 women, and the rest were young men. I'm sure they were well prepared by their community. I didn't know that then. I didn't know that, about the civil rights movement that much then and how they prepared young people for these things. But they were so disciplined and so admirable, and they were attacked constantly in the halls. I mean, bloodshed. People didn't use guns that much, but they used knives back in the 50s, penknives.
This aspect of when a school were being integrated, children being attacked is not well-known fact, but you saw it from your eyes that happening.
I saw it from my eyes, and all I saw was horrible injustice. And so I started being called the N word. They call it the N lover, and persecuted myself. And I really, that's what, opened my eyes. And then I did marry at 18, married into a family that was very pro segregation. They were carpenters, they weren't rich people, but the father was integrating the carpenters union, trying to integrate, and so finally did the carpenters union. So I met a lot of African American workers, and that I never would have probably otherwise. So that was really what set me on the path of.
We are happy that something set you on the path which has brought you so much joy of learning, teaching, establishing Native American Studies program. Thank you so much for your work. Truly appreciate that. And there is a lot more I can learn, but my time is gone. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I've been talking with Professor Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, historian, activist, and professor emeritus. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
You have been watching Muslim Network TV. We are on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and our own website, muslimnetwork.tv, and YouTube and Facebook pages, pretty soon on Apple TV as well. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more programs.